Welcome to BeerNet Radio. Listen to on every continent except Antarctica. BeerNet Radio.
Oh, so good.
That's where she sits now. Oops, that's my over-the-shoulder cam when I'm...
We can see your bottles of whiskey in that shot, Harry.
Well, okay. These are samples for a podcast that I'm planning.
These are samples for my mouth.
Well, hello, Bill Kirk. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you guys for having me. This is a big day.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift new album, and you guys still have time to talk.
I know it's a big deal. They're playing it upstairs, my tenant, and my neighbor's cutting his lawn. So we have all kinds of ambient noise again. So, we should start by saying that, Bill is with MKM Partners, and he does cover, what do you cover, Bill? Why don't I just ask you?
Beer, cannabis, retail, distribution. If you make it, move it, or sell it, I probably cover it in some fashion. So a little bit of everything. Not necessarily the pure three-tier that you guys know of alcohol, but three-tier of packaged food.
Okay. All right. And you and Jenn are married. Is that right?
Is that right?
That's a question, right? You were there. You gave a speech.
I know, and
Yeah.
I wasn't even scheduled to give one. That was the best part. What do you make of the Mtn Dew thing? Is that just a relationship deal, or are they like trying to play chess, looking around corners 10 years down the road? Or, I mean, it kind of prevents Pepsi from even buying them.
I think they're pushing, and we talked about this back in January or February. I mean, they're pushing the regulatory envelope. They're figuring out. Molson Coors was simply they're figuring out what they're allowed to do with non-alc brands, and the regulators have been pretty quiet and haven't really done much. But now you have counterparties starting to file lawsuits, so the courts are now have to start paying attention, right? Because it's being put in front of them. So I don't know, but those are obviously huge mega brands, and Brown-Forman and Coca-Cola, we've all mixed plenty of times over the years. So why not explore that combination for Coke and Jack Daniels? I get it. I just don't know how the regulators are going to feel about it. And I also don't know how big it could be. I mean, those are really simple mixes. They're not as complicated as a Paloma RTD, which is, I guess, is a pretty simple mix too. But, I can make my own Jack and Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder what's going to be on that truck down the line. Like, we talked to Emiliano, and he was like, a dozen brands. It's all Pepsi licensed brands. But once you go beyond that, and presumably if and when you go beyond that, what does it look like, right? Is it going to be all RTDs?
Pepsi seems just hell-bent on owning their distribution no matter what it is, whether it be chips, soft drinks, beer. And Coke is the opposite. They refranchise everything and let others do that and focus on marketing. So to me, that's fun, because the two largest beverage companies in the world have different strategies. And so it'd be interesting to see how each one adds value or not. And historically, owning your own bottlers has not created value, but times may be different now. That was a very low margin business back then, and margins are higher now because mix is so much better. Thanks, Micro Polo, and thanks, the guy at Buy, and all these super premium drinks. Let's talk about Chad Krogerson. Kroger buying Albertsons.
So I'm in the line at O'Hare last week, coming back from actually meeting Bill in Jersey from the gauntlet that was the MBWA show, and then the very successful Alliance for Women in Beer. And
Very
I'm complaining,
successful.
yes, and I'm complaining, I'm texting Bill in the line because without fail, I end up choosing the wrong line in security. Like, without fail. It's like the textbook Murphy's Law cover. So I'm texting Bill this, and he responds back, Kroger-Albertson's merger, and I was like, oh shit, you win. You win. So Bill, remind us, what's on the table here, right? Like,
so at $25 billion, you're combining Kroger with all its banners, owns about 2,800 stores, and Albertsons with all its banners owns about 2,200 stores. Kroger, before this, it was already the number 2 player, market share of food grocery in the country, 9 share. Walmart's got the most, almost 25. So Walmart, Kroger, and then right around 3rd or 4th is Albertsons at like 6 or 7 share. So you have 9 share trying to combine with 6 or 7 share. And that share nationally, maybe only adds up to 20, 16 or whatever. But in some local markets, it's huge. Some in Seattle, that share together is huge. In California. Share together is huge. Even in Chicago, with Mariano's and Jewel Osco, that share locally is huge. So the government is going to have a really long process of looking at hyper-local individual markets to decide if these 2 giant grocery stores can come together. And so it's going to be a very long process. It's going to require a lot of divestitures in those markets. They're not going to be allowed to buy all of it. They know this, but they're not going to be allowed to buy all of Albertsons. They're going to only be allowed to be able to buy some. And that's where the debate starts, is like, how much can they really buy? And then is it still worth it to them if it gets minimized too much by the government?
And that break point is like what? Like how many stores?
Yeah, so Kroger's saying they think it's only 100 to like 375, I think the range is. But in their merger agreement, if it gets to 650 stores, Kroger can walk away. So if the government asks for 650 stores, Kroger is allowed to walk. Now, when we look at like zip codes, right? Like, fine, let's look at these footprints. When we look at those individual zip codes of where all the stores are, they share Albertsons locations. 629 of them share a zip code with a Kroger location. And, some zip codes are big, and that's fine. But some zip codes border each other, all of them, and they might have stores that I'm not even counting that are just across the zip code line from one another. So I come out to a number that's a lot higher than Kroger's 100 to 375, and much closer to what they've put in the agreement as their breaking point in the 600s.
I got you. Okay, and to me, what's the benefit? I don't see, if you're gaining share nationally, great. You can put some pressure on your suppliers, I guess. But if you're not gaining share in a market, there is no benefit. Like, you're just a bigger company. I don't see what the strategic benefit is. Except that you're scared of Walmart, I guess.
Yeah. I think your point's right. I think it comes a lot later. I think the benefit is down the road because they're talking about, we have to invest in these Albertsons stores, $1.3 billion. We have to raise the wages of these Albertsons people by $1 billion. We have to lower price by $500 million. All right, there goes $2.8 billion that you got to go put into this. That offsets, at least in the beginning, offsets those scale benefits or those negotiating power benefits with the labor unions. So it doesn't come early. It comes over a long period of time. It is a bigger audience. So Kroger, Walmart, Amazon are all trying to build these giant marketplaces. They include third-party sellers. They obviously do their own selling and marketing on there. But they just are trying to build the largest online audience they possibly can to go get ad dollars. So that's kind of the evolution, is we need more eyeballs. And so the physical stores are one element of it, but just getting those eyeballs onto your online Kroger.com, Albertsons.com, all those manufacturers now need to pay more for ad placement or search placement.
Is everything media?
It's becoming that way, because Walmart's big pushes are on Walmart Plus, right? They want to sell a subscription model. They want to link it to entertainment, right? And keep people in their ecosystem where you can't leave. It's almost like the walled gardens of the iPhone products, right? You're in the Apple ecosystem. That's valuable, very valuable over a long period of time. That's what Amazon's trying to do. It's why Amazon bought Whole Foods. It's just we can't have food be a reason somebody leaves our ecosystem. So now we have food. Walmart entering all the other stuff outside of food, and now Kroger trying something similar to build that audience. And so pays over a long period of time, but no, not in the immediate sense.
And for food, right, it's funny that they chose now to try and do this merger because food prices, right, like are sky high. So why now, considering it doesn't seem like that great of a time for them to be able to get approval?
It's a terrible time from that perspective, right? It's hard to sell decreased competition when food is as inflationary as it has been at any point basically since the 70s. So it is a really bad environment for it, but the process is going to take a long time. So they're not talking about approval until 2024. And at that point, maybe food isn't that inflationary, right? Maybe you just get to the point where, okay, food isn't that inflationary. That risk is a little bit less than it is today. But I completely agree. It makes all the complaints louder. You saw Senator Klobuchar, right? Day one saying we're going to have an antitrust hearing on the Senate. Now, the Senate doesn't have much power over something like this, but they aren't usually that quick to react to any deal. And here they are day one, because food is such a sensitive topic. Food pricing is such a sensitive topic. I think an underrated risk here is the slotting fees, right? I mean, this is the two biggest conventional grocery stores coming together. They will control the slotting fee market for manufacturers. Now, your space, you guys, right? You guys can't do this, but those retailers. The retailers,
you ask.
Yeah, the retailers charge a lot for it, right? And now one entity is going to control 5,000 locations slotting fee policies, and the smaller manufacturers are going to have a really hard time getting national placement. And national placement is the only way they get profitable scale, right? Like, think about the craft brewers, how upset they get when there's a mega manufacturer deal. And they maybe even have less ground to stand on in some ways. And they get very loud and they get concessions. And we're going to hear the small food manufacturers throw an absolute fit over this because their route to market or their access to market is harmed.
You know, what's funny is we this week reached out to, I don't know, 40 maybe of the top 50 craft brewers asking about their reaction to this deal. And it was crickets. And the two that did respond were like, A, either they're not really big in my market, or B, you know, we service everyone, you know, we play with chains, we play with independent, you know. So they either don't care, or they're biding their time, or they're just slightly bigger than the smallest players who might care in that. But of course, food manufacturer is different than beer producer.
Well, so. and some of those craft brewers, they can get profitable in a regional sense, right? You can get profitable as a regional craft brewer if you have good taproom business and good regional share. You can't really get profitable and compete with the giant General Millses of the world if you lack national scale, right? There's no tap room. There's not much regional branding in packaged food. You need national, right? And like, so there's less of an avenue to become profitable for packaged food than maybe there even is in craft beer.
Yeah, and because there aren't slotting fees, it's easier to get in. It's, you know, sometimes I'm walking down the aisle at H-E-B and I'm like, how did they get in the shelf? I mean, Rusty must have been off his game that day or something.
That end cap is getting bought, and if you're a small brand, you can't buy it. You can't get.
Well, let's pivot to Circle Crunk, and I mean, this is the news. You know, Circle K is testing in 10 stores in Florida. Like Jen said, it seems like a pop-up in partnership with a cannabis company to sell cannabis under their license. You know, it's just 10 stores out of like 650 in Florida, so it's very, very small test. But it could lead to things. And is this the mainstreaming of pot? And what do you make of this, Bill?
Yeah, so the structure sounds like it's going to be like a detached, well, like part of the same building, but like a sublease, its own section, its own doors, like in New Jersey, how they sell beer at a grocery, right? It's got to be its own little.
Yeah, well, like
section door.
Costco,
like Costco liquor stores in Texas.
Yep, exactly. So that's what it sounds like. But Circle K is a huge retailer, to your point. And in 2024, there's hopes that Florida gets recreational cannabis, because Florida's only medical. So like, I don't know how many medical needs get serviced at a gas station. I don't know, but in
You'd be surprised. We both said it. I mean,
well, they have the pills at checkout. That's one medical need. But so Circle K being involved increases the likelihood that in 2024, recreational adult use, everyday use gets on the ballot. All right. When it's just a bunch of weed people asking for it, it might be a little tricky to get on a ballot. But when you have one of the biggest retailers who will likely be now in support of full legalization in Florida, it's on that 2024 ballot. And if it's on the ballot, it passes. So you have, with Circle K joining, you have a much higher chance of one of the biggest states legalizing marijuana. And so I think that locally is a very big deal. But it's in the same vein of these retailers want to participate. These CPG companies want to participate. These pharmaceutical companies want to participate. So they'll dip their toe in the water. Minority equity stakes, small partnerships, joint ventures. They're trying to be there when they're allowed to be there. And if 10 stores is not allowed, fine, whatever, it's just 10 stores. But that's what it is. It's dipping your toes, it's learning, and maybe in some ways, the cannabis companies might be letting, what's the expression, the fox in the hen house? Yeah. Right? Like, why do I want to teach Circle K how to sell weed? Right? If the day comes where Circle K is allowed to do it on their own, that business might put all my retail locations out of business, right? So I'd be a little hesitant if I'm a weed retailer to go teach one of the best retailers in the world how to sell a new category.
Right. And so I think Circle K making news, being an early adopter, also teaches the consumer, oh, Circle K sells weed, so if they do roll this out, it's already in the zeitgeist. But we all know that C-stores are the number one channel for beer and the most important channel, I would say by far, for beer because it's so exclusively beer. There's very little wine and spirits sold in C-stores. But you bring cannabis into C-stores, that could be a game changer as far as demand and cross elasticity of demand. Look at me talking like an analyst.
Substitution effect. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, this could be a big deal. It's a minor story, but that access is everything. Going to a dispensary is not convenient because you can't buy anything else there. But I go to a C-store probably almost every day, and that would affect my buying patterns, I would suspect, if I were a big weed smoker.
and people are used to buying, alcohol and even tobacco there, right? They're used to buying things to smoke there, right? There's lighters on the counter, and people are ready for it. So to your point, it would be a really convenient step against the illicit market, right? If you could get cannabis at a convenience store, that hurts the illicit market, but it probably would have a substitute effect on beer purchases in that channel too. Maybe not, aggregate beer purchases, but it takes away some of those single serve, the highest margin, cans away.
Single serve would be, I would think, the most affected.
How bold is this on Circle K's behalf, right? How much are they sticking their neck out here?
So their parent company, and I don't even know how it's pronounced, Couche-Tard or something like that, so forgive me if I'm pronouncing their parent company wrong, is a big publicly traded company. And publicly traded companies have shied away from U.S. cannabis. Right? Constellation's in Canada. When AB was partnering with Tilray, Canada, Molson Coors Hexo, mostly Canada, some CBD stuff maybe in Denver, but mostly Canada. So the biggest companies have been really shy, even tobacco companies, Altria with Kronos, Canada. So the biggest publicly traded companies have been very shy to do anything in the US because it's not federally permissible. Right. So that is their risk, is they are doing something in the US with a cannabis company. So that it's not the 10 stores, because that is not that risky from like a business perspective. If it fails, it fails. It is, we are putting our publicly traded listing at a little bit of a riskier position than anybody else has been willing to so far. I mean, Constellation wasn't even willing to go majority stake in Canada. They had to stay minority. So it's a big step. It will eventually it'll be like so commonplace that we might have forgotten how risky this was, but it is pioneer stuff.
I mean, it's incredible to me. I mean, even if it's a 0.5% risk, if you get delisted or something, it could be catastrophic. I mean, and you've seen, private companies, Southern Glazer's most, they've kind of just said, we're going to take the risk, while a lot of beer distributors say, we're not going to take the risk. We don't want to risk our license. And because I think if you make the calculation, nobody in the U.S. government is going to shut down Circle K because of cannabis, right? The public would be outraged, I think. Although there are, big chunks of the public who don't want this to be legal. So there is a tiny risk, but yeah, it's
well, there's investors
small.
There's investors out there that their mandate, they cannot own companies that touch cannabis plants. Right? Like there are investors out there that may not now be allowed to own Circle K because they, in theory, could be touching a cannabis plant. Now, the argument might be they're just subleasing the space and they're not touching it. Right. That could be the workaround, but that's the risk. Is there some people, just because of the federal status, aren't allowed to invest in companies that touch cannabis in the U.S. And so
nerds.
Well, in fairness, that mandate or that questionable status saved them a lot of money, because those stocks have been a huge pain in the neck for investors, right? They haven't done very well over the last 3 years. So in some ways, their legal fears saved them from some losses.
Right. Hey, Bill, what happens if marijuana gets descheduled, right? Like there's been talk. Does that mean that all of a sudden AB can take a stake in something, or?
Chaos is what happens. So most people have always thought you need Congress, you need the House and the Senate to change cannabis legislation. But under descheduling with HHS or the DEA, you can get cannabis permissibility on a federal basis without Congress, basically. And so the executive branch can almost sidestep Congress here. And depending on the laws that came out of it, which who knows, you have individual states that those assets might not be that valuable because interstate commerce is all of a sudden allowed. You have a illicit market where there's no penalties anymore, and maybe the legal companies just can't compete if there's no enforcement of the illicit market. Just that becomes the market. So I don't know what the outcome is, but this is a big new step where the rules are completely up for grabs. I mean, I guess to answer your question, we don't know what would happen if it got descheduled, because
it would be FUBAR, fucked up beyond all recognition. It's a military term. Yep. But I mean, you're right. You can't just take away a law and allow a vacuum. Even the liquor business had the 21st Amendment, at least saying we're going to leave it to the states. But just descheduling it, the illicit market would be, like you said, the market. Why would you pay all that extra to pay taxes and all that?
And you have some of these cannabis companies today that set up these growing operations in like cold weather states because they're required to, right? They're individual state businesses because you can't go across state borders. Right. And if you have a big business that's growing weed in New York, and
Acreage, right?
Oh yeah, and Acreage has some, Curaleaf has some. But if that asset's in New York, and all of a sudden you're allowed to bring weed from California into the market, your growing asset in New York's worthless, right? That all that money you put into the ground to grow a nice, awesome, state-of-the-art greenhouse in New York is worth zero. But all the strategics, all the Circle Ks of the world, all the ABs of the world would come in droves to try to figure out the space. Like overnight, you would almost create a bidding war because you have to act first. You almost can't wait till a competitor acts. They would all have to do something in the space immediately. On a Twitter Spaces, so take this for what it's worth, but on a Twitter Spaces, the chairman of Curaleaf, the biggest cannabis company in the world, it mentioned AB twice, mentioned some other companies, but they mentioned, as examples of people who would be interested, they mentioned Anheuser-Busch twice, and they said if someone would come and buy us after that moment. He's basically saying someone will come and buy us after that moment, and if they did, they would have to pay 4 times what we're worth right now. Now
of descheduling.
Yes.
After the moment of descheduling.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously he's talking his own book, right? I mean, he wishes he was worth 4 times what he currently is. But he made it a point to say, here come all these big companies on that moment, and we're worth a lot more. The debate is, are you really worth a lot more, or can these companies figure out how to do it without you?
Right.
But the interest would go up exponentially because they can. It's a huge market.
How do you make money, though? I mean, the demand is there, but I mean, demand is demand, and it's being met.
Mm-hmm.
And can you charge a premium for branded commodity? I mean, obviously it's done every day in beer, but I don't know.
Well, it's more like wine, right? There's less brand loyalty. You're taking recommendations from friends, from dealers, from bud tenders. Wine shops mostly on style, right? I want a cap or whatever. It shops less on brand. This would be the extreme version of it, right? People would have a really hard time building brands in like smokable flour. You might get it through vape and pens and oils and like hardware equipment, or you might get it in gummies, making a gummies or a food brand, or maybe even in beverages. But like smokable flour, the bulk of the market, there's no brand. It's grapes.
Right.
But I also think you get a lot of new consumers once, right? The demand is what it is now, but once a market is legal, you get a lot more consumers because, like Jessica Lucas, who used to be with BDS, presented once, I think, at our deal at DPS and showed how, Colorado, one of the first legalized weed states, people who were adopters in the very beginning versus people who were adopters many years later. And it's like, it's basically alcohol. So I, for one, would partake of the weed if it were legal in Texas. It's not, so I don't. But there's a lot of people like me out there, right? So demand does increase, but how much, right?
It does. Those aren't the power users, though, right? Like
they're not today, right? But they might end up being. Right?
They could be. Where the industry's had trouble is converting the power users. Like alcohol has the power users. The legal alcohol market obviously has the power users. There's not a real black market in alcohol. I mean, maybe some moonshines, but it's not a real number. No. The illegal market has kept most of the power users because they've been using it for a really long time. Where they're the bulk of the consumption. They've trusted, they rely on it, and it's cheaper, right? The legal market is cheaper. Illegal market is cheaper than the legal market. So they've had trouble converting the power users, and then you get these, a little bit one-off. I don't know, I'll call them soccer moms that join the category a little bit. They aren't going to consume as much as a different type of head count could.
But I've got to think that the legal market ends up finding a way to make a better experience for everyone, right? Like it becomes legal market 2.0, right? It's your Instacart instead of your, Randall's. I go to my, right? Like, that will happen eventually. Eventually, that will happen.
And when you see that when there's like a scare in the vape cartridge market, right? When all of a sudden people are getting sick from vapes, like they did a couple of years ago, people go back to the legal channel because they don't know where these weird pieces of equipment are coming from, or when there's a story of some sort of bad mix in the cannabis, right? Or what's in your cannabis? Is it pesticides? Is can fentanyl be in there or whatever? Then you see people go back to the legal market. So safety is what would push people in there. And then the branding probably has to happen on the process side. Like beer branding isn't on really, maybe on some of the hops, but beer branding isn't on the type of barley or the type of, the wheat that they use.
Right.
The beer branding's in the processing. So same with cannabis, the branding won't be on the actual flower. It'll be on how you can process that flower.
And the convenience factor too, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the reason you haven't seen demand for alcohol crater when weed is recreationally legalized is because, like you say, the power users are already using it. And then the incremental users are usually older and they don't drink as much anyway. So it's all you're seeing is changes on the margin.
And different use cases, right? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Well, thank you, Bill, for being on. That was very helpful and fascinating. And Jenn, are you thumbnail chasing?
I am. If you put a better picture up than last time, were you looking
Okay,
for one
will
of
you
the
do
more
this?
awkward?
Go like this. Go.
I'll give you a couple of them, Harry.
Yeah. Oh, that one. That is. Oh boy, I'm gonna have a field day.
Have you learned how to do a carousel yet? I bet you haven't.
That's good. Well, what do y'all gonna have any plans this weekend?
I'm sticking Bill with the kids tomorrow and running down to one of my best friend's birthdays.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll
To
be
San
fun.
Antonio, to your neighborhood, Harry.
Oh, good. All
But
right.
Bill's, you've got some stuff planned too, right?
Well, I found this amazing ranch in San Antonio to go arrowhead hunting.
Oh my gosh. Well, listen, thanks for drinking beer, guys, and appreciate you being on. Have a good weekend. And Jenn, I will talk to you on Monday.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you, guys.